Welcome to the Clear-Sighted Career online learning series brought to you by the University of Notre Dame's Alumni Association. My name is Sharon Kane and I serve as Director of Professional and Academic Programs. The title of this webinar is Your Brain at Work, and it is for individuals who are interested in better understanding both what strengthens and what compromises the health of the human brain. We are going to explore what evolution and research are revealing about how our brain works best. There's no question that competition, ever-connectedness, globalization, stress, and technology have a significant impact on the performance of the human brain. That's the reality when it comes to our work and our life. It's also true that human beings are social and that we want to be in community. And our work environments, our teams, and other colleagues represent an important community. We crave meaningful connections and fulfillment and happiness in our work. So in this webinar, we're going to provide you with practical tips based in research that are designed to strengthen your productivity and resiliency. I'm pleased to introduce our presenter on this topic, Dr. Nancy Michael. Dr. Michael joined Notre Dame in 2014 as an assistant teaching professor in the College of Science. And she serves as the Director of Undergraduate Studies for Neuroscience and Behavior. In her role, she engages our students both in the classroom and in the lab, where she shares her expertise in neuroscience and behavior. Her passion is educating us by making complicated science both understandable and actionable. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in Biological and Biomedical Sciences from Western Michigan University, and she earned her PhD in Neuroscience from the University of Minnesota. Nancy, welcome to the Clear-Sighted Career Online Learning Series, and thanks for sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, and such a wonderful introduction. So my job over the next 15 minutes is to condense multiple bodies of literature into a couple of slides in a digestible and clear way. So if you're ready for the ride, here we go. We're going to start talking about stress. But to understand where we're at in the context of stress, we really have to understand and have a better picture of how we got to where we are. So if we think about the majority of evolutionary history, we've been outside, walking around, and the business of living took up the majority of our time. The business of living involved things like finding food, making shelter, staying safe, and we could not do this alone. So we existed in tribes or social groups. Right? So that's how the majority has gone. Over the last 150 years or so, we've gotten increasingly sedentary to this is kind of where we're at right now. We're mostly immobile and we sit all day long and we spend the majority of our day, depending on our job, by ourselves. So in the context of stress, let's think about this from the evolutionary history as well. We see a stressor. For most of the history, right, this stressor has not been an iPad or a computer, but it's been something in our environment that causes us alarm. When we see that stressor, it activates a series of brain circuits to activate the HPA axis or the fight or flight response, right? So when we have a stressful stimuli in the environment, the sensory information first goes to a part of the brain called the thalamus. You can think of the thalamus as like a gatekeeper. It kind of sends simultaneously information to a part of the brain called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is a part of the brain that's responsible for processing what's called emotional salience. So how important is a particular stimuli in the environment and what should we do about it? In the case of a stressful or threatening stimuli, the amygdala will activate kind of emotional, autonomic, and hormonal responses that get our body ready to fight or flight. It activates the HPA axis so that we're ready to fight or run away. At the same time, but delayed, by a couple hundred milliseconds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in the grand scheme of physiological activation is actually an extraordinary long period of time. At the same time, that information about that stressful stimuli gets sent to the cortex, which is the wrinkly part of the brain on the outside. Cortex determines the context so that we can identify, right, we're stressed, we're activated, so no matter what, our blood pressure is up, our heart rate is up, we're feeling tense. A couple hundred milliseconds later, we identify that physiological feeling as nervous, excited, scared, angry, right? All of those emotions are cognitive components that are overlaid over the same physiology. The stress response is designed to exist in a situation of homeostasis, right? So homeostasis is the body's way of keeping itself in balance. The example we always give is like the thermostat, right? So we like to be at, what's it, 98.6 degrees. And we have mechanisms in our body that if we get too hot, we start to sweat to cool ourselves down. If we get too cold, we'll start to shiver. Well, all of the systems in our body kind of participate in this homeostasis process, and the stress response is no different. So when we get really stressed out, again, in the context of evolutionary history, the stressor, right, let's say it's a lion, the stressor is a lion, and oh my goodness, there's a lion, and I'm either going to run away and be safe from the lion, fight the lion and win, or fight the lion and be dead, right? But either way, it's going to be done in a relatively short period of time. So when the stress response, when that HPA axis is activated, our stress hormones get high, it'll feed back to the brain, and the brain will then start to deactivate the stress response, assuming that the stressor is no longer present. In the context of our history, however, stress doesn't work like that anymore, especially in an achievement-based environment. We work harder, we work longer, we work later, we have a deadline, we have another deadline. Well, to meet this performance review, we have to take on another project. And so our desktops have now been replaced with our devices that are with us all of the time. So in the context of the stress response, when work is the stressor, we are never able to remove ourselves from that stressful stimuli. And that stressful stimuli, depending on how we engage with our jobs, is then a persistent stressor that never goes away. So that HPA axis, that fight or flight response, is always a little bit activated. So with this as the context, the question is, when we have to stay up late to meet deadlines, we miss dinner, we check our email one more time before we go to bed, and then we get wrapped up into a conversation that, oh, I just have to answer this one more thing. We're at lunch with a friend or a family member and our phone goes off and we're compelled to answer that email really quick, right? How do we balance work and life? But I don't really like this question because for many of us, work is actually a very important part of our life and we want to achieve and we want to do well. So I think a better question for me, or at least a question that I am more comfortable with, is how do we balance our drive to achieve with our mental and physical health? And here's my consolidation of lots of different fields of neuroscience in a very short period of time. So there's a tremendous amount of information from different fields that are collapsed for what I'm about to tell you. Community is so important when it comes to physical and mental health, right? And not community Facebook, not community Snapchat, but community. Taking the time to be with our friends, being together, laughing, sharing food, sharing meals, sharing time, sharing success and defeat, being together. It activates a series of very, very powerful neurochemicals that promote bonding and friendship and trust and altruism, and they're reinforced by another set of neurobiological chemicals as well. So we get neurobiological goodies on the front end when we engage in these behaviors, and neurobiological goodies on the back end when we participate, right? And it drives us to want to participate in this more. It feels good. A lot of us can get a little grumbly because we have to work and we don't have time to go out with our friends. It's really important to remember that we can build and cultivate this community at work. We have email, we have text, but you can still pick up a phone call and talk to a person in real life, right? So I've made an exerted effort to try to do that lately. Should I send a quick email, or can I just call somebody and just say hi and address whatever I need to actually in live person? You can also even walk down to somebody's office, which I know sounds crazy, right? Like, why would I want to walk to somebody's office when I can just email them? But it's important to remember that it's community and people that tie us together, right? That is what the essence of resiliency, or again and again, it's the relationships in our lives and the quality of those relationships that can make us more resilient, more successful, and happier in the long term. Managing stress is a big issue. So having strong relationships help us manage stress, and also being aware of where we're at. So this graph that you're looking at right now is taken from the pedagogical literature in terms of stress levels and optimal learning. But learning can apply in or outside of a classroom. It can apply anywhere. And what we know is that when there's a good amount of stress, right? So we're not talking anxiety, we're not talking boredom, right? Too little stress, we're bored, we fall asleep. Too much stress, we start to get overwhelmed and confused, and we don't think straight, right? There's an optimal amount of stress that keeps us engaged and excited and attentive. But it's really, really easy to start to fall over into this more anxiety. So I would assert that many of us probably border on this lower levels of anxiety, depending on what our jobs are and what the requirements for our jobs are. So in those moments, science can tell us that we don't think as well, we don't think as clearly, we can't plan as well, we become more reactive instead of proactive. So when you start to pay attention to how your body is feeling, right? So we talked about earlier, doesn't matter if you're nervous, excited, scared, angry. When your HPA axis is activated, you can start to feel it, right? You ramp up over the course of the day, your shoulders end up here because there are just so many deadlines that you have to get to, right? Just take a deep breath. Slow down. Activation of the HPA axis activates a part of the peripheral nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system. The simple act of taking a deep breath engages the vagus nerve, which activates the counterbalance of the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system. Taking a deep breath and activation of the parasympathetic nervous system will decrease heart rate, decrease blood pressure, result in vasodilation, which is the relaxation of the blood vessels themselves, increases oxygen content, and really actively works to shut down or counterbalance the stress response. So even if you just set an alarm twice a day, right? I have colleagues that will turn off the lights in their office twice a day just for a couple minutes and just breathe. After you've done this, it's amazing how much more focused you can be and engaged. You can consciously make the choice to arrive in a state of relaxed alertness. Nutrition is pinnacly important. So if you think about your body as like a sack of trillions of cells, and those trillions of cells need to divide and reproduce and keep up with cell death, right? So we build new skin all the time, we build new intestinal lining all the time. And the only material your body has to do all of this new cell division and all of this building of your body is the food that you put into it. So if you're putting bad food into your body, you have bad building blocks to do the rejuvenation, restorative processes that your body needs to do. Now, I am not a great cook. I have 2 small children. I have a full-time job. And so we just eat a lot of food, right? And it's not fancy. We have whole fruits, whole vegetables. We have a lot of hummus. We have a lot of nuts. But that way I know that even though I'm not creating like these crazy au jus sauces and all kinds of nonsense that I don't have time for, that my kids and my family and I are getting the necessary nutrients that provide our bodies with the best possible building blocks to keep us healthy. Sleep is something that cannot be underscored enough. In our society at large, we undervalue and disvalue sleep every day, right? It's like a badge of honor. Oh, I only got 4 hours of sleep last night because I was up so late working. Science tells us that this is not the way to go. When we are up late, chronically activating our systems, right? The blue lights in our high efficiency lighting and in our screens and devices suppress the secretion of melatonin. Melatonin is the body's kind of sleep chemical. As the nighttime begins, as the sun sets, darkness sets in, melatonin levels increase in our body. Melatonin is a central and peripheral signal that tells all of your cells in your body that it's time to start going to bed, right? So it lets your body to start slowing down. When we have our devices, there are blue lights in our devices that actually suppress the secretion of melatonin. So we will keep ourselves up later, longer, without feeling tired, the more that we're on a device close to bedtime. So we need to allow ourselves the time to sleep. Really important things happen during sleep: memory consolidation, emotional processing, and your brain gets rid of all the junk during sleep. Just like when you exercise maybe a little bit too much, or you just got back to the gym for the first time in a couple of years, your muscles generate waste. It's what makes us feel sore. Well, your brain is the most energetically active organ in your body and generates a tremendous amount of waste over the course of the day. When we sleep, your brain kind of opens up the vessels and allows for the flow of all that waste out of the brain. But unless we're getting enough sleep, that regenerative and restorative process is largely diminished. So we really need to be placing a priority on sleep. Adults, it's recommended that we get between 9 and 7 hours of sleep in a night based on individual need. And I would say many of us fall remarkably short of that any given day. So in summary, we know that work can very easily become a chronic stressor. And not only in like I'm feeling really stressed out, but in a physiological sense as well. We know that in order to be the best that we can be, stay efficient, be thoughtful, creative, attentive, we need to take good care of our health, of our physical health, so that we can be the best we can be and achieve to the greatest of our individual capacity. Some of the ways that neuroscience has told us that we can do this is by really cultivating community. And community can be a part of the workplace as well. We need to practice mindfulness, right? When we're feeling really, really stressed out, even something as simple as taking a deep breath can counteract the sympathetic and HPA fight or flight response, which can bring us back into a state of relaxed attentiveness so that we can focus and get back to work. Being able to put good nutrition into our bodies so that our bodies have the best building blocks possible to maintain our health, and making sure we allow sufficient amounts of sleep so that the body can do the regeneration and restoration that it needs to function most efficiently. There are a number of resources available online through community resources. Here are just a few if you're interested in learning more about any of the things that we've talked about today.
Nancy, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. You've covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time, which is great. And I want to just unpack a few notions a little bit further. And I'd like to start with this relaxed alertness, where we're stimulated, but we are in balance, right? That's the optimal place that we want to be mentally and physically.
Yes.
And yet we know we can live in that low anxiety, or perhaps even more. Things can spike, things can spark that in us. So I would think that it would be a challenge for achievement-minded individuals to stay in that relaxed alertness space. And I'm wondering if you can give us some encouragement in that, and specifically about learning. It seems we know that high-performing organizations really become such because the individuals who work in those organizations are learners. So learning is very important, but learning is best done in that relaxed alertness. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I think we can all remember the days that we were in school, right? And there were classes that were so boring and you felt like you were totally sleeping, right? So that would be in a state of low stress. There were classes that it felt like too much and you couldn't keep everything straight. And no matter how, like you started to have anxiety even just thinking about going to that class. But then there might be classes that you knew you were challenged, but you were engaged and motivated, right? So those would be examples that I think most people can relate to that can give you a good sense of what it feels like to be in each of those. And so in order to be the best achiever that you can be, we have to figure out ways, and it's going to be different for each individual, but figure out ways how to keep us in that activated and engaged place as opposed to falling one side or the other.
And if we find ourselves falling in one side or another, either internally or we're in an environment, drawing upon the mindfulness techniques, right? And also keeping in mind maybe that graph of where people really want to be in the middle of that curve.
Yeah, yep. And I think it's one of those things that the more we become aware of how we feel and how we interface and what our reactions to certain situations, the easier it is to develop an awareness and to keep ourselves kind of in balance.
Surely, that makes good sense. So I want to turn to the topic of resiliency. We know that human beings are living longer and many are working longer. The research is telling us that millennials will make job changes every 3 to 5 years. That's a lot of change, and that's also over an extended period of time. And so I'm wondering what tips you might have for us to build our resiliency.
Yeah. Community is a big piece of that, having real, authentic relationships, that it's okay to show up however you are, right? That we don't, having at least a couple of people in our lives that we don't have to put on that face for, because we are all human and we all have lives in which things happen, right? And so nobody has it easy all of the time, but many of us, I think in those times that we needed the most, struggle to find people that we can really connect with, that we can just say, you know, I need help right now, right? So cultivating those friendships and relationships along the way. Another great suggestion is a little bit counterintuitive, but it is the idea of kind of getting outside of your comfort zone.
Yes.
So the more we can learn about other things, we learn a tremendous amount from failure. In a high achieving world, we are not very comfortable with failure. But what we learn from failure is that we can overcome failure, right? So talking to people that are different from us, doing something that might be a little bit out of the norm, like you believe in it and you feel like, no, these are the things that I know, and this might be the next logical step, or the next step that actually might take us in a different direction. And even if it fails, even if you fall hard, then you learn that's okay. You get back up.
Isn't it also true that that's where the brain forges new pathways?
Yes, absolutely.
So, therefore energizes the brain even further.
Yeah.
That newness.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. So the more different experience you have, the more different people that you talk to, the more places you go, the more that you can engage with whatever it is that you're doing and have a diversity of experiences, your brain actually makes new connections. And the more connections you have in your brain, the more creative you can become, the more you can think outside of the box, because you have this diversity to draw from.
Right. Well, I want to thank you again on behalf of the Alumni Association for making the science around evolution and what the research is revealing, really making that digestible for us. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
With that, I would like to draw upon and encourage you to take advantage of 2 resources that are available to Notre Dame alumni. The first is available at our website, which is my.nd.edu, where you will find tools, resources, and services that we provide. Secondly, alumni are invited to contact our career advisor for a variety of services at career@alumni.nd.edu. Thank you.